Welcome to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show. Today is the 1st of September, and I'm sitting here with Anthony. Anthony, how's it going?
Good. I'm excited for like we were just discussing before, some college football, but also some fights because I didn't really get to watch the ones last weekend due
Yeah,
to the time.
yeah. You had it rough over here. I'm East Coast, you're West Coast, so East Coast had it much better for waking up around 8 and catching the main card.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and college football as well this weekend. So we have a really, really good weekend. But before we get into anything sports related, a couple of quick announcements as far as the Daily Show goes. The format of the Daily Show is changing a little bit. And if you watched the episode with me and Jack earlier this week, I forget what day that was, but we talked about potentially changing the Daily Show, and we've come to some conclusions on that. So moving forward, each day is going to kind of have a specific sport and a specific podcast for that day. And we're sitting here with Anthony and myself because Friday is going to be UFC day. So we're talking UFC on Fridays. That gives us a good opportunity to preview upcoming cards, recap any good cards that happened the week prior as well. So for Fridays, that will be the plan moving forward, and that is what we are doing today. The other days of the week will be sorted, and you will see those next week when those days come out. But right now, we're here talking UFC. And the structure we have today for this show is we're going to start it off with a little UFC Singapore recap. Then we're going to discuss some news. Then we are going to preview UFC Paris. So that's what we have on the slate for today. That'll kind of change week to week depending on, is there big news? Is there a pay-per-view? So that'll shift week to week, but that is the order we're going with for this week. So we will start after that long-winded rant, but we will start with UFC Singapore, and we'll start right at the main event. Max Holloway and Korean Zombie. This was ended up being a pretty good fight. So I guess we'll just start, Anthony, with your thoughts on the fight itself and how things played out.
Yeah, I think like you said, it was pretty entertaining considering I don't think there's a single like diehard, I guess I could say like UFC fan that really wanted that fight in the first place. Max Holloway, we've seen him just, continue to go through the division, anyone not named Volkanovski. Um, and the Korean Zombie is, hasn't, he's getting up there in age. He was not looking as good as he used to. So that was kind of like a layup, it seemed like, or a potential, probably another knockout for the Korean Zombie. And to be fair, that's what it was, and that's what happened. But I will say, the fight itself, it was entertaining on both sides. It looked, the Korean Zombie had, a few good flurries and stuff, but just struggling kind of with the speed and feints of Holloway.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it is what it is. It's I'm sure we'll get into this in a second. It was his last fight, but I think overall turned in a great performance in front of a home crowd. So
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of people were kind of upset that this fight was booked in itself, just because it felt like Max Holloway is basically championship caliber at this point. Max Holloway has more talent than some guys that are UFC champions. Unfortunately, he's just in the weight class with the guy that is the number one pound for pound in the world, and that guy has his number. So it felt like a championship caliber fighter against a fighter that was on his way out the door. And the betting odds reflected that. I think Max Holloway was like minus 800 or so. But like you said, the Korean Zombie landed a lot more shots than I was expecting. I thought it was going to be a lot more one-sided. I didn't think Korean Zombie would land that much. And ultimately, Max Holloway finished the fight with the highlight reel knockout. But like, it was not an easy fight for him, right? Korean Zombie landed a lot of good shots in the first round, tagged him up a little bit in the second round. And ultimately, Max Holloway, strangely enough, had the power advantage in that fight. Maybe that was a little bit of Korean Zombie not having as much sting on his punches and Max Holloway having a much better chin at this stage in his career than the Korean Zombie. But Max Holloway able to get the big moment in the second, goes for that anaconda, which I thought he was going to get. He doesn't get. And then the third round for Korean Zombie just to go out on his shield, basically. He went for it, didn't play out in his favor, but it takes a lot of balls to go after the guy with the consensus best chin in UFC history and, hunt that knockout. So credit to him, and he made it more competitive than a lot of guys would have against Holloway. So I give him credit for that, even though he ended up losing by knockout. Now, this was obviously, like you mentioned, Korean Zombie's retirement fight. Personally, I loved it. How do you think this stacks up in comparison to other MMA retirements? And do you view this retirement as one of the better retirements in recent memory?
Um, well, it's funny because kind of like you just said, I do think, yeah, 'cause he went out on his knockout, or he went out, he lost in a knockout, but like you said, went out on a shield. And I think it's up to your opinion, I guess, the way you look at it. No, and every time you see knockout, it's a bad look. Like especially if you lose by knockout, you're like, oh, you know, it's tough to come back. Way, especially when people do the MMA math and compare fights. Like he lost by decision, but this other dude got knocked out by him. But in the sense that we've seen Holloway for 5 rounds just dominate people, and that would probably look. I feel like that would almost look worse than going out how the Korean Zombie did. Is how, like you said, he was walking him down and stuff. Obviously, he got caught and put to sleep, but I think it summed up his career of walking people down in that way. And for the retirement fight, you're fighting Holloway, who's probably who is obviously, I guess there's Volk too now, but who's was about the most respected person in that weight class in that division. So the loss too is to like a legend. So I think overall in that aspect of the specific fight, I would say it was one of the better ones in recent memory. I think it delivered in every way besides maybe a win in front of the home crowd, but um, I don't know if that was really in the cards to begin with the fight. Um, and then, but everything after too was awesome with the standing, the ovation, the singing from the whole crowd. Um, and then I saw the video of him like hugging his wife outside the octagon, and I think all of that, everything besides the fight too afterwards, was pretty spectacular as well for retirement.
Yeah, and I like the way you worded it. Like he went out being himself. It's like he went out in Korean Zombie fashion, and it's like he like other guys when they retire. Let's use Shogun Hua for example. He was on a prelim in Brazil against Iho Pateria and gets knocked out, and it's like Iho Pateria, Max Holloway, two very different fighters. Korean Zombie got an opportunity to go out there against one of the best in the world. That's much better than getting knocked out against a guy who's near the bottom of the roster. Like he still went out against the toughest guys, put on a great performance, and the before and after, like you mentioned, like when he was walking in the cage, they were all singing his walkout song, and a great, great walkout song in itself. But they're all singing his walkout song, and then when he leaves the cage, they're all singing it. Very emotional. So it's like all things considered, it's like it was fight of the night. It was a great fight. He doesn't win, but it's like I don't think anyone was expecting him to win. So he still overperformed expectations. So I'd chalk this down as one of my favorite retirements, especially in recent memory.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I'm curious to like watching as we go forward. I feel like the UFC is a little bit trying to do better with the retirement fights and stuff like that. And compared to like you said, Shogun. And I was gonna say, I wonder if this is something they're just now kind of getting hip to and trying to do better, or maybe because I could see it's also maybe fighters nowadays are starting to retire, like not overstay, seeing what's happened with past fighters now. Because I'm sure there has been, Shogun probably could have retired 2 or 3 fights before that. So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it's, or maybe it's, best of both worlds. UFC is being more mindful about it, and then fighters are also maybe saying, okay, maybe it's time to hang it up a little quicker too now.
Yeah, and to that point, Korean Zombie hung it up at a really, really good time. It's like he loses the belt and he goes, "Well, I'm probably not a championship caliber fighter." And instead of sticking around and taking a lot of damage, and he's a guy who has taken a lot of damage throughout his career, but instead of sticking around and taking more damage and being forced to fight like 145 is not a great division to be an older guy in because it's like Arnold Allen, Sadiq Yusuf, Giga Chikadze. It's like those guys that aren't particularly in the top five, very, very good, and will do a lot of damage if you're not a top tier fighter. but he went out there with a chance. If he beats Holloway, then he's right back in title talks and all things are great. But, he loses to the top two guys and goes, well, I'm not a part of the top two, so there's no reason to stick around. I've already made my money and established my legacy. So he went out well. Robbie Lawler, I think, went out at a pretty good time as well. He didn't overstay his welcome, and he finished it in the first round, and they had that video package ready to roll. That was a great retirement. But yeah, there's guys who go out a little bit longer than they should. So I feel like you're right. The UFC is, when these guys go out at the right time, it kind of it's less sad, I think is the best way
Hmm.
to put it. Like seeing Shogun get knocked out by Ihor Peteria, that's a lot more sad because it's like, that's not an outcome that would ever happen 5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe even. So I think that plays a part in it as well. Um, Kind of sticking on the retirement train, Anthony Smith had a lot of talks about him retiring, and he goes out there in the co-main event and he gets a win, and he gets a very, very close split decision, or I believe it was unanimous. I don't know if it was unanimous or split. Regardless, very close decision, 29-28, and they give it to Anthony Smith over Ryan Spann. I guess just to start, what were your thoughts on the fight, and how did you score it if you scored it while watching? I know not everyone scores it while watching the fight.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you my kind of thing, and then I'll let you go. So I missed this fight, but this is what I saw. So I saw that Smith had won, and I was like, okay, good, well, good, because that's kind of who I picked, and I like
Mhm.
him more. So that's what unbiased because I didn't really like judge it, but that was my first thought. And then I saw so I, but then my friend Simon said, yeah, I heard he got robbed though. I think he got robbed, and I was like, oh dang, because that sucks. So I checked the stats, and I think he outlanded and threw less. In like I don't know if there was a takedown or anything, and I was like, well, the stats kind of look like him. And then I checked the group chat, and I know you and someone else thought it was probably should have went the other way. Um, so I was like, okay. And then just kind of before, I tried to find a highlight video. It was some dude kind of talking over like some certain exchanges that were happening. And then even then, I was like, okay, maybe it could have been Smith. But so that's what I saw. I saw it was a lot of people were saying robbery. Some people were saying, it could have went either way, maybe. But and then the final thing I'll say before I would say the stats did look like they were pretty heavily, not pretty heavily, but um, on Smith's side enough, like far enough to where I was like, oh, really? A robbery with those type of stats?
Mhm. I will say, I scored it for Span, but I think a robbery is a little bit of an aggressive
Okay.
way to describe it. I do think it was a close fight, um, in comparison to past robberies. Like this wasn't as bad as like Cub Swanson, Hakeem Dawodu.
Hmm.
It's like that was worse in my opinion. I still scored this for Span. First round, I thought it was quite clear Smith was winning that round. Second round, Span gets a big knockdown, really controls that round, gets some top time. Second round, clear Span. Round three was really clear Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith was throwing, or excuse me, it was a really close round. They give it to Anthony Smith. Round three was like Anthony Smith was throwing a lot, and Ryan Span had the heavier shot. So it's kind of like Smith did miss a lot in that round as well. So it was like volume and it's comparing volume, forward pressure in comparison to the damage that Span was doing because he was landing the harder shots. It wasn't really an easy round to score. I did score it for Span though, but it's not one where I'm like, oh, Anthony Smith, like he got out of there with an absolute robbery. But I would have
Hmm.
scored it for Smith at the end of the day. In the long term outlook of things, it is not going to be that impactful of a decision, I don't think. Um, this kind of leads me in the other direction of Anthony Smith retiring. Um, I didn't really like what I saw from Anthony Smith. I didn't really like what I saw from Ryan Spann. I thought it was a fairly sloppy fight. Spann, you know, he's really a guy that is either going to knock you out or submit you in the first round. And outside of the first round, he really struggles. And Anthony Smith wasn't really able to take advantage of that. Anthony Smith didn't look as fast. His boxing didn't look as crisp. So I'm kind of concerned for Anthony Smith going forward, especially how they matchmake him, because you think he wins this fight and he moves up the ranks. If he moves up the ranks, he might be in trouble. And the last thing I'll add, he wins this fight a couple years ago cleanly by first round finish. Now he's squeaking out a decision. Not a great look for that kind of regression. I know Span has improved, but it's not good to see the regression in the pure performance.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that because, yeah, that was only a couple years ago, and they had that little like beef moment where Anthony
That
Smith
was
got mad
strange.
too. Yeah, um, but yeah, I don't. He's someone too because this is coming up with two losses, and I was gonna say, well, like you were saying, you win this fight, you kind of go back up there to fighting the good people. Well, he's lost to Ankalaev and Johnny Walker in his last two. So when he fights one of those top five or top tier guys, it's been losses recently in his career. Um, but even when you take that step down and you don't look as good, especially yeah, when you fight someone you already beat pretty handedly that first
Mm-hmm.
time, I don't think not really a problem. So I always like him. I just like him as a person, the way I think he's super smart, the way he explains it, fighting. So if he wants to do another, and obviously he's a warrior, as we've seen in his fights of like either the John Jones thing or losing teeth and still fighting. But I don't know. I just think that it should be in the cards to maybe retire, but I wouldn't mind, seeing him fight again. I just don't know, kind of like we are talking about. I don't think he's getting the belt. So, and I don't know if I want to just keep watching him kind of gatekeep because he's pretty old for that. And then my main point was going to be I think he's just already such a good analyst and like commentator, though. So just do that is what I
Mm-hmm.
would say. Because, like I said, I think he's so super smart, and I like him around the sport of MMA and being in the UFC. So I do want to see him again. But then I could just see him in the box on fights or behind the desk. So
Yeah, he has a pretty good media career going because he does do a lot of broadcast work, and he has that podcast with Michael Bisping as well. So
mhm.
it's like that's a very prominent podcast in the MMA community. So he's on broadcast. He's got a podcast. So and it's like he's the guy that if he were to retire today, it's not like we wouldn't see him for 4 years. It's like he'd be around doing interviews, giving his thoughts on things. So he still has a pretty good lane crafted out in the sport. And like you said, it's like we were just talking about guys who stuck around for too long. But at the same time, it's like he won, so he kind of gets a little bit of a longer leash. If he goes out there and gets knocked out in the first round, that leash gets a little bit shorter. But he won, so that leash gets a little longer. I'm interested to see who they book him against next. I mean, there's a lot like light heavyweight's a tough division to get old in. Not everyone is great, but the guys that you can lose fights at light heavyweight in a very damaging way, I think is the best way
Mhm.
to put it. Like if he were to fight Khalil Roundtree and lose, Khalil Roundtree probably violently finishes him. It's like there isn't really a way to lose at light heavyweight that you kind of go out cleanly. It's like it's got to be sloppy, as unfortunate as it is.
And I'd say too, though, especially just kind of who he is and the fighter he is, he's the one that will take a absolute beating, kind of like Glover,
Mm-hmm.
too, in that in that fight. So I feel like yeah, I agree. Light heavyweight, or I mean, um, shoot, yeah, oh yeah, light heavyweight. I was right. I call it lightweight sometimes. Light heavyweight, I'd agree, is like a bad division to be older in and take losses because we've seen. They just they don't quit, and then the attackers they don't give up for like just beating you.
Yeah, it's rough. The other fight, we're not going to talk about every single fight on this card because obviously, like we talked about earlier, we've got a few other things to touch on. But the other one that stood out to me was Aaron Blanchfield and Tyler Santos. And I don't know if you watched this fight because this one was in the middle of the night for you over on Pacific time, basically because it was very early on the main card. But this ended up being a pretty impactful fight because it is two girls very, very close to that belt at the 125-pound weight class. Did you watch this fight? And if you did, were you impressed with Blanchfield's performance?
Uh, no, I didn't get to see this fight either. I tried to, do the research or whatever, catch up on it, but
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
wasn't there live for it. What'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can't blame you for missing out on it live, considering it was probably rough for you trying to watch
Uh-huh.
these fights. But yeah, I thought Blanchfield looked. She wasn't able to land the takedown, so in that regard, it wasn't good. But I think this was an impressive performance from Blanchfield because Talia Santos is massive for the division, insanely strong, and is like she's one of the best grapplers in the division. So Aaron Blanchfield, who's a prominent grappler, went out there and just she it was a scrappy win, but she beat the toughest matchup for her in the top five. It's like everyone else in that top five, not really a grappler. Valentina, not a grappler. Grasso, not a grappler. Fior, not a grappler. It's like this division, a lot of strikers at the top, and she just got rid of the only girl that really has a good chance of defending her takedowns. So to me, I thought it was impressive in that regard, and her cardio was absolutely absurd. Talia Santos was tired in round two. At the end of round three, I would have she was beat at the end of round three. If it was going to round four, Blanchfield's probably getting that finish. So for me, it was impressive to see her get rid of get a win over someone that is a tough matchup for her. And also, if that were a 5-round fight, that would have been impressive. So I think there was a lot to like from Blanchfield's performance.
Has Okay, because I do like Santos as well, and I think Blanchfield has just shown so far with every challenge that's been put in front of her that she is better. Um, but I will say, has she fought a 5-round fight before?
She hasn't gone all 5 rounds. She was
Okay,
booked against five for Entourage, and that ended in two.
and yeah,
So
okay,
I believe that was her only time booked for 5 rounds because before that she had Molly in a 3-rounder, and that was quick.
yeah, that was quick. Because I would just say that's just more interesting to eventually for that title fight is you know especially when you have that cardio and stuff in your back pocket. It truly is like one of the biggest advantages in a fight. So I'd
Mhm.
be especially with her style too of um, kind of ragdoll and wrestling. Just the grappling people and stuff. And then being able to do that for 5 rounds no problem is interesting. I'll say for uh, her future in the division.
Yeah. And I guess we don't really have to get too deep into what they should do with that 125-pound title, but that division is going to get real interesting here soon because we've got Minon Fior and Rose Namajunas this weekend. Then the week after, we've got the pay per view. Week after that is the Valentina and Grasso headlining a fight night with the belt on the line. So
Hmm.
we've got two more high profile fights coming up in that division. And so for we'll talk about this in a little bit with the UFC Paris preview, but this Manon Fior and Rose Namajunas fight is going to be pretty important to determine whether Aaron Blanchfield gets that title shot. Because in all honesty, I think we're going to be looking at a situation where, regardless of who wins, Fior or Rose, and we've got Aaron, I think we're looking at two people who deserve a title shot. So I
Hmm.
think this is going to get a little bit sticky here in the future.
Yeah, I think I agree too. It is. I mean, this is good though. The fact that I would say in general that it's going to be complicated who deserves a title shot is good for women's MMA in general and getting that
Mhm.
out there. Although they are doing the title fight on a fight night, which is one step one step forward, two steps back. But it's all good.
Yeah, that is a good point. Thankfully, we'll have a good stretch of fights, and it's nice to get a free title fight after
Oh, I'll
UFC
take it.
293 being a shaky pay per view. Which
Yeah,
next Friday we're gonna have to break that down. And I was looking at it earlier today, going, "Oh, oh man, there isn't a lot here. Um,
yeah.
it's rough." Then moving on, outside of UFC Singapore, there was a pretty big news story that came out a couple days ago. And basically, to sum it up, to people who have not seen it, Saudi Arabia, a public investment fund, purchased a minority stake in the PFL. So this isn't a mirror, and this isn't an exact mirror of like the Live Golf thing or the Saudi Arabian League soccer league buying a lot of players, but it looks like we have some Saudi Arabian money coming into MMA and specifically in the PFL. A couple other details. There was a $100 million investment from this public investment fund, and the PFL will be hosting some of their super fight division fights, which is the Ngannous, the Jake Pauls, the Serranos. They're big names. Some of those fights are going to go down in Saudi Arabia. So I kind of just want to get your thoughts on, do you think this affects MMA greatly? Do you think this could damage the UFC? How do you think this? Obviously, we don't have a ton of information, so we're kind of making more educated guesses here. But how do you
Mhm.
think this affects the landscape of MMA?
Well, I'm fine with it. I think it's probably good. I think, I mean, UFC is kind of a monopoly, so I think competition elsewhere is good, especially if anything, if UFC loses some fighters to the PFL, like I'm saying, way in the future, like Shane Burgos too, he put on just a great fight recently for the
Hmm.
PFL, and I really liked him. So it kind of was sad at first when I saw he was going to the PFL, but then it's good because he's probably going to get paid more compared to what he was doing at the UFC. So overall, I think competition is good and it should lead to a better it should be better entertainment for fans, for MMA fans in general. Hopefully UFC either steps it up or the PFL steps it up and finds ways to do things better. And then if the PFL does eventually start growing and becoming more popular, well, then the UFC has to, make changes to it, within itself to start doing better, such as maybe hopefully paying fighters better. Um, but then also, just fixing a whole host of things that have been issues within the UFC. So I don't think it's going to be like, I mean, yeah, like you said, it's early, educated guess. I would just say competition is good, but I don't know if it's gonna like be a total game changer and instantly you're gonna see and I don't think instantly you're gonna see the UFC just start like crumbling. I'm sure I would love to see, I don't know if Dana's been asked this, but I'm sure he's gonna have some good things to say about this specifically too.
Yeah.
That's how you usually gauge how nervous he is.
I remember a couple months ago, a reporter asked Dana about the PFL buying Bellator, and his response was, "That's a great idea. One organization that can't sell pay-per-views and can't sell tickets buying another organization that can't sell pay-per-views and can't sell tickets." So
Hmm.
if his answer is a little bit more calculated than that and less insulting, that's how you know he's on the rocks and he's a little concerned. Um, but I think what this might do is I think it may affect the Bellators, the One Championships, the Bare Knuckle FCs, the maybe even Cage Warriors, some of these other promotions that have high quality names. So when guys hit free agency, right now we're getting a pretty decent spread of where they go. Like you said, Burgos went to PFL. Thiago Santos went to PFL. Romero
uh,
went to Bellator.
my guy
Santos
Corey
also,
Anderson went to
yeah,
Bellator too.
Corey Anderson, Bellator. Santos also popped for PEDs and PFL, which was interesting, but whatever. Um, the BKFC was getting, they've got, I don't know if Luke Rockhold is still with them, but Luke Rockhold had a fight. They've got Mike Perry. They
Hmm.
had Eddie Alvarez, Chad Mendez, but he has since retired. So I'm interested if PFL's big name Nate Diaz out there that's a free agent. I wouldn't be overly surprised if they throw a lot of money at him right now if that's available. So I'm interested to see how it affects the free agency landscape because I think we may get a more concentrated pool of talent outside of the UFC. Where right now it's a little bit more spread, but I think the PFL may go out there and try and sign some of the best guys outside of the UFC. That may be their strategy, and then pluck off a handful of UFC guys here and there when they hit free agency. Like Shane Burgos, perfect example, and perfect for the PFL because
Mhm.
he's an exciting fighter and he's not like this massive, massive name that you have to pay $10 million to get. It's like they probably didn't have to completely break the bank to add Burgos. So I imagine there's going to be more fighters of that lane that head over to the PFL. And I will say, if the PFL ever gets big, I hope they absolutely get rid of the season format, and I hope they absolutely get rid
Yeah.
of the no elbows rule. The no elbows rule in PFL drives me nuts. Every time I sit down to watch the PFL, I remember that there's no elbows and I get mad. And I still watch the fights, but it is a slight bit of a buzzkill that it is a slight bit of a buzzkill that there are no elbows, and that's very frustrating to me.
I would agree with that too. The elbows rule specifically, I think it's such a great weapon. But I would say my one question I was going to ask is, isn't not PFL's, I assume not owned, but isn't it partnered with ESPN
Hmm.
heavily like the UFC too? So I just think like if they could start building up the fighters, kind of like you were saying now, maybe from those other like Cage Warriors, some of the other feeders, smaller promotions, and they start going to PFL. I mean, they have the relationship and contract with ESPN to like, it's as easy to watch their fights, probably only easier at sometimes to watch their fights than it is the UFC. So if they can build that roster, they do have the avenue to, maybe start getting a bigger fan base and bringing people in. Because I can't remember. I was watching some sport with my dad or whatever, but came on next was PFL, and I was like, well, I'm already here. I'm on the couch. I might as well just watch it. So, I mean, I think that could happen more and more, or people will tune in more if they start building that roster.
Yeah, I think the PFL is in a much better position to get people that only watch UFC. Obviously, there's people who watch every single promotion, but to the group of fans that only watch the UFC and do not care about any other promotion, I think the PFL is in a much better spot to grab those fans than your Bellators. And I've tried watching Bellator. Bellator is the hardest thing of all time to watch. I can never actually watch Bellator when I want to. They also are terrible at promoting it, so I never know when events are. And so I don't know when the event is. I'm trying to watch it. Bellator's an absolute pain. One championship much better because they've got Amazon Prime partnership for certain fights, like DJ. All of his fights are on Amazon Prime. So it's like, but PFL being on ESPN, it is, like you said, just as easy to watch the PFL. It's literally the same thing you need to watch the UFC. Difference being the PFL hasn't even started pay-per-views yet. So the UFC is having pay-per-views for their big fights, and the PFL has not started that yet. They will with the Ngannous and the big names, but they
Hmm.
haven't started that yet. So now, as far as that goes, don't even get me started on how anti-pay-per-view I am. I think it's terrible for the growth of organizations and the sport, but that's a whole other can of worms. For example, Conor McGregor fights on pay-per-view. The Super Bowl is not on pay-per-view. It's like if you want people to watch the sport, give them a Conor McGregor fight for free. All of a sudden, you've had the most people you've ever had watching the UFC at one time. Said I wasn't going to get into it, but I got into
I
it.
liked it though. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So, do you have any closing thoughts on the PFL Saudi Arabia agreement before we swing it over to
Um,
UFC Paris?
no, I guess I knew I saw the first one. I guess we kind of covered it then um, with that segment or section. So
Mhm.
no, I'm fine with that. That was interesting news. I feel like it just kind of got that update. Came, I guess, not that I was like scouring for that information. So it surprised me when the update came. But yeah, no, I would like to see how it goes in the future.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to say the least. And shout out to this person for tuning into the show. Appreciate it.
What's
Thank
up?
you. Yeah, and swinging it over to UFC Paris. This is the second year in a row they're going to Paris, and Cyril Gane, the headliner, once again. This time we've got Sergey Spivak instead of Tai Tuivasa. I will say this fight probably won't be as good as the Tai Tuivasa fight. That
Hmm.
fight is one of the best like heavyweight back and forth in recent memory. This fight previews a little bit differently. So I guess right at the jump, how do you see this fight going, and kind of what do you think is at stake here for each guy?
Shoot. Well, Okay, first off, I'll start with this. I think I saw something that Gon's losses in the UFC are in fights that he gets like taken down, and I think Spivak's losses in the UFC are fights where he doesn't get a takedown or like two. So it's the clear grappler versus like striker thing. But I'm gonna I like Gon. I think he's extremely talented, especially in heavyweight. Super talented for heavyweight. Obviously, he has not been well. Hopefully, he has now, but that still very big holes in his game, especially when it comes to grappling and and the wrestling part of it. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and say he can hopefully stay on his feet or at least keep the distance and plug him, hit Spivak with enough shots to maybe not hesitate for the takedown, but at least telegraph it enough because with that long length and of gone, um, and eventually find the shot or at least tire him up, tire Spivak out as well enough, maybe depending on how many rounds it goes to where that wrestling or that grappling isn't the scariest idea. He's not as nervous about getting taken down, taken down, taken down. But to be fair, I guess he did also. My last thing was Gon's wrestling. I mean, I don't trust it, but I mean, Ngannou, it was late. What, fourth or fifth round was only when Ngannou went for the takedowns.
It was
So
late in
I
that
don't know if
fight.
that was Gon's first 5 round fight in the UFC, or no, he had been 5 rounds before that. But especially with Ngannou dealing with that power, it happens. And then the John Jones, I'm never gonna like fault someone for getting taken down by John Jones, especially now that John Jones is 20, however many pounds heavier too. It's probably even harder to get him off you.
Mhm.
So I do think he does need to prove it now, though, that he's at least trying to become a full-rounded MMA fighter by at least staying on his feet or looking like he knows how to defend against Spivak. So
Yeah,
that's we'll see.
yeah. There. This is like to me. It's like Gan is in a tough spot here because it's like he has to prove it. Like they're giving him a spot where he has to prove that he's made grappling improvements, and if he loses, it's like all of a sudden you've lost, I believe, three of your last four. I think it would be, because his only win was the Tuivasa win, and Tuivasa is like the same. But I don't want to say the same fighter because their striking is different, but striker with poor grappling.
A great
Um,
matchup for him, though.
yes, a great matchup for Gon. And like I think this fight's interesting because in terms of like finding a grappler to beat, I think Spivak is the guy because his takedowns are not outstanding. He has solid takedowns, but it's not like this is like some like guy you're gonna absolutely it is possible to defend his takedowns. And I've been kind of going back and forth. I did pick Spivak here, and the reason I picked Spivak was the way that he grapples. Once he gets the takedowns, he just throws big ground and pound, and then guys stand up, and then he's really good at mat returns. So he just
Hmm.
ends up like getting guys to go up and down for 5 minutes in the first round. Then all of a sudden, guys are tired, and they're tired of getting up and going down. Then they're just down, and they're getting hit with ground and pound, and it's like he kind of breaks guys' cardio. Um, in that regard. But on the flip side, it's like I could easily see a world where Gon is using that speed and footwork on the outside to dance around. You know, if he like Spivak doesn't have a great chin. It's like Tom Aspinall defended one takedown and hit him with the nasty two piece and knocked him out cold. So it's like if Gon can defend one takedown and land one clean shot, it's like that may be the fight. So it's like both guys have very, very and like you said earlier, like Spivak could get tired. The way that I view that is it's like Spivak the grappler, if you make him strike for too long, he's gonna get tired because he's got more grappling cardio. Gon, inverse of that. So it's like one of these two guys could get tired if the fight isn't where they want it. So it's like I really see routes for both guys to get the job done, but I'm just leaning Spivak just because I do think once he gets one takedown, he like the way he grapples can make Gon tired. And then if that footwork isn't as clean, if he gets a little bit tired, then he's going to have an easier time of getting on those hips and getting takedowns in the later rounds. But I think it is a good fight. It is interesting because you can make a case for both guys. So it kind of adds a level of interest there or a level of intrigue because I want to see how Gane does against the grappler.
And yeah, and to that point, because there is, that's why I think, kind of like you just said as well, it is a tough, not tough, but interesting matchup because there are avenues for both fighters. It's just that Spivak has shown already the avenue of winning, as in, takedowns. We've seen his hands, nothing, it's fine. They're just meh. But
That's a good way to
yeah,
describe it.
but he's shown obviously the path through the grappling, ground and pound submissions, compared to where when I pick on, I'm banking on something he hasn't necessarily shown yet, and that would be the takedown defense. But I think he can do it, and obviously I think he's uber talented on the feet, and or in the striking, which I really like. But it's Spivak has shown it before, and to where I'm kind of banking on Gon to hopefully kind of not maybe not full potential, but show that he has it in his bag and that he is capable of defending multiple takedowns, or at least, or if getting up to, but staying on his feet, and kind of what, because I guess once again it's just tough though, because I keep wanting to go back, like he's done in his previous fights against John Jones. Well, it's like that's not really fair, but yeah, just keep it on his feet, and like you said too, I do hope he could keep that distance, work the footwork, and then I can't remember if he has. I guess he's 3 out of his last 4. I wouldn't mind a Gon knockout too, because I know he goes to decision sometimes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a knockout would also get fans back on his side.
Yep.
And it's in Paris, like you said.
Yep. If he gets another knockout in Paris, fans are going to be going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I'll add on the Gon side is that he knows his grappling needs to be worked on. It's not like this was an overwhelming secret that he needs to work on his grappling. He also accepted this fight. This is a situation where Gon had a lot of negotiating power over the UFC in terms of who does he fight next, because he had to be the main event on this card. It's like, in Paris, do they want anyone else to be the main event other than Ciryl Gane? If Ciryl Gane says no to Sergey Spivak, they probably find him a different opponent. So those things kind of aid to your point that we haven't seen it yet, but it's like there's reasons that we believe that he can make those improvements. So, and then the other thing that I will say is I rarely root for fighters because I really like them. There are a handful of guys that I really like, so I root for them. Max Holloway is my prime example for that. Favorite fighter, root for him every time he fights. I'm just a fan of the guy. Outside of a handful of names, I don't really root for fighters, but I think about how the landscape of things can change if one fighter wins. And I think a Gane win makes this heavyweight division much more interesting than a Spivak win, because we're in a prime position to see Gane versus Aspinall if Gane gets the win. And I think that is a much better fight. One of the best fights you can make at heavyweight, in my opinion. And then it's like Spivak and Aspinall have already fought, and Aspinall knocked him out in the first round. So I'm not sure we see that again. Now you're left sitting around going, well, who is going to, fight Tom now? So I do think a Gane win could make this heavyweight division more interesting, and it could make the future a little bit clearer as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that too. That's why I think Gon is a lot more talented than a lot of the heavyweights. So from a viewer's perspective, I think he has a better chance of putting on more entertaining fights. And I think that's a perfect one. I think that Tom Aspinall would be a really fun fight too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it happens.
I hope so. I'm crossing my fingers. Moving to the co-main, this is a strange fight, or maybe an interesting fight is a better way to describe it. Rose Namajunas jumping up from 115 to 125 to take on Manon Fior, who is ranked in the top 3. And as we talked about earlier, this has massive implications for the title, the next title fight. So I guess just to start, what are your thoughts on Rose moving up to 125? Because in my opinion, she's an average 115 pounder, and she was in a good position. She's got 2 wins over the champ, but she's moving up a division.
Average as in for the weight class?
Yeah, like size-wise.
Okay. I'm just like, dang, I thought she was one of the better ones.
No, not skill-wise, size-wise.
Okay, yeah, so then I'd agree. It is an interesting move up. I really wasn't ready for it. this is off the heels of just that bad Carlos Esparza fight, right? She hasn't fought since. I mean, I think there was still more to do um, at that weight class. I would say she's 1-1 against Zhang, right? So that's still even, or did she
2-0.
lose?
2-0.
Oh, she 2-0. Oh, because she out wrestled Zhang in the second one.
Yeah. She's got 2 wins over the champ, and she's moving up.
I guess the other thing would maybe be I don't know if the UFC, but you can't really do that. It's one that works the other way if the champ's 2-0. Because I can say maybe the UFC doesn't want to book that fight a third time, but I mean, it's like, well, she doesn't have the belt, so she deserves that fight. I don't know. I guess point blank, I'll say I think there was still like if she would have took three more fights at her original weight class would have been content. I think she still there was some fights there. No reason to move up, as in lack of skill or things were going bad for her. Just I'd say one bad fight where she didn't throw or anything. It's not even like a bad loss, like where she got beat up. It was just a bad loss for all the fans that had to watch that fight. But
Fight is an interesting word to use to
yeah,
describe what
yeah,
we saw.
exactly. So I am excited for her being in the new weight class, but I will say I'll leave it at very tough matchup for your first fighting against one of the top people in this division.
Yeah. And that was kind of my thought process. And I picked Manon Fior in this fight because it's like Manon Fior is she's going to be bigger in the sense that she's going to be a little bit longer. She's going to have a couple inches of length on her. She's going to have a couple inches of height on her. And the way Manon Fior fights, I like it and dislike it at the same time, but it's very unique, but also very simple. She basically just throws a side kick to the body and a oblique kick to the leg, and then fighters can't walk in recklessly, or else they just get hit with the side kick. And then if they walk in too aggressively, she hits them with a straight and a hook, and it's like, well, that's an effective skill set, but it's like, how often do we see like a skill set boiled down that much to like a handful of moves? And it makes me question how good she can be in the long term. But in this fight, it's like when you're going against someone you're probably going to be a little bit bigger than, it makes it easier to go out there and implore that game plan. So I don't even think this is a great fight for her to move up to. I think a fight against Grasso would have been a better fight to move up to, even though she's the champion, just the
Hmm.
way those fighters match up.
And I will say too with that Grosso, I guess you could say better striker. She definitely is a better striker for the weight class, but I think some people think her like striking is amazing. And I think that is when it's compared to the weight class. But Grasso would have been one to actually probably strike with Rose, and you get get a fun matchup that way. I don't know. I think what do you think? So because I guess if Rose wins this fight, she's already in title contention then.
I feel like she has to be.
Uh
Like
huh.
she's a champ in a former division, comes up, beats I believe Manon is number two ranked fighter, Blanchfield
I thought.
three. So
Yeah.
um like she was number one before Valentina got bumped to one after she lost. So
Exactly.
it's like to me, and Manon Fior's resume is good too. She's got the win over Chukagian, who nobody had beaten in a long time. So
Hmm.
it's like I have a tough time, saying Rose doesn't deserve a title shot if she wins.
Yeah. I mean, okay. I 100% agree with that. I was also looking at the old fights. She has a couple of the you know flyweight names, such as Chukagian or Jennifer Mai, I think was the other one, which
Mhm.
it's always a good name to have in that division. I just think I just so badly want to see Blanchfield over uh, um, these two fighters specifically, because I don't know. I'm always greedy about that. If Rose wins, fair enough, she could get the next shot. But I always want to see someone fight more than once to get a belt, and
Mhm.
in the division. But uh, I'm just interested. Back to the fight specifically, I'm just interested to see how Rose looks a little bit bigger, and if she's not going to be like shell shocked like last time, and actually just see if she can implore like a game plan, um, compared to what happened last time.
Yeah, and that fight was like that's Rose has always been someone where they like her mental health has always been a point
Hmm.
of discussion in her fights, and sometimes that results in her not being, 100%, they're mentally invested, or maybe not at the intensity that you would like, and it leads to fights like the Carla fight. Um, and I heard a rumor that she stopped training with Trevor Whitman and now she just has Pat Barry in her corner.
Oh,
I
that's
don't
horrible.
That might not be true. I haven't seen like a reliable source on that. But that's something where in between rounds, that's what I'm looking at. I want to know if it's just Pat Barry. Because if it's just Pat Barry, I guarantee you she loses this fight. Pat
Hmm.
Barry is an awful coach, probably an awful person as well.
Fair enough
Yeah.
to
Um,
say, you know.
Allegedly, allegedly an awful person.
Exactly.
But it's like even in the Carla and Rose fight, Pat Barry goes in the corner. They split it like 50-50 time wise between Barry and Trevor Whitman. Pat Barry's going, "Oh, this is great. This is just the game plan we wanted. We're winning this fight." And it's like, no, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. And then Trevor Whitman comes in and he has to watch his words because Pat Barry just said that dumb shit. And then
Hmm.
Trevor Whitman has to come in and be like, "Oh, good job, but hey, we need a little bit more volume. I want to see you throw some more. We got to win some rounds more clearly." And it's like, yes, yes, that is the advice.
Do that.
Do that. Because it's like if she would have picked up the volume, it's like it didn't take much volume to win the later rounds in that fight.
No.
So if you've got just Pat Barry in your corner, I am very, very concerned, but we'll have to find that out on Saturday because I haven't seen anything reliable to prove that or dispel that. The last thing that I'll add on this fight is you kind of mentioned this that you want to see Blanchfield get the fight. I'm with you on that. I want to see Blanchfield get the fight. And in all honesty, this may be a hot take, but I think Blanchfield beats everybody in the top five, especially in a 5-round fight. Like just the way styles match up, I think she takes Grasso. I think she takes Valentina. I think she takes Fior. I think she takes Rose. She just beat Santos in a 3-round fight. It's like I think Blanchfield is probably not only the might be most deserving, not most deserving. Regardless, I think she's probably the best fighter, and that may be because of the way the styles match up. But I think she beats everyone in that weight class.
I think I'd agree, especially. Well, she just already got past Santos, who I will say, looked good at times in that
Mhm.
first round. Um, from one of the things that I heard, but I think she probably needs to work on that gas tank, kind of like you said too, where she's just like dead tired. But I think shoot, was this? Oh yeah, Valentina, especially in her last couple of fights, hasn't quite looked the same. Not that same level of dominance, I'll say.
Mm.
So while I'm never going to count her out, I think the wheels are coming off a little bit. But oh, and my one thing I want to add too was, like you said, that mental health has always been a huge part of Rose's career. I think I'd imagine it would gotta be hard to come back in your next fight after the performance you just had. So maybe whatever issues had led to that type of performance, I got to imagine you got to even try even harder now to get that out of your head and be more confident in the next time you step in, knowing what everyone just said about the other fight.
Yep, I'm with you too. Especially this fight against Fior could end up being Fior sidekick, Fior sidekick, Fior sidekick, and all of a sudden you're a half round in, and it's not been overly entertaining. It's like
And
she
you're
could,
doing the same thing.
yeah. All of a sudden you're right in the same position that you just have been heavily criticized for. The one thing you don't want to do is do it twice in a row, and it
Hmm.
may not even be her fault, but she could be put into that headspace just by Fior's game plan. So
Yeah.
that's definitely something to watch as we go into this fight. Um, so I've got one thing I want to close on with Morgan Charrier. Do you want to touch it all on the Saint Denis and Moises fight or the Charrier fight? I know we're kind of getting low here on time. I just don't want to skim over
Yeah.
everything you've got sitting out that you want to address.
So low, if we're kind of, we're low on time, I'm not the biggest, like, I don't know a whole lot about the Saint Denis, so I feel fine not speaking on it. Um, but I am curious. I want to hear your, you know, what you had to say about the debut of this dude, because I don't know much about him either, but I also don't know a whole lot of French talent, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, so yeah, I'm excited. I want to, learn about the prospect or hear whatever you have to say about him.
Yeah, and just one quick thing for anyone watching, I'll have the preview out today. So it's like anyone who wants more in detail thoughts on Saint Denis, Moises, any other fight on the main card, the preview will be out today as well. So you can go read that and get my full thoughts on the card and everyone else's predictions from the UFC section as well. So keep that in mind if you were sitting on your edge of your seats to hear thoughts on any of the other fights. So we'll throw that out there as well. And then as far as Morgan Charrier goes, this guy is someone that I have been watching kind of from the sides because I like watching Cage Warriors because Cage Warriors, I think, is major Europe promotion for those that don't know, but they have some of the best crowds in MMA in Cage Warriors. So I like watching it because the crowds are always absolutely insane. And Morgan Charrier is an interesting guy from Cage Warriors because he's gotten MMA real young. He's got a real crappy record. It's like 18-9. You look at that, you scoff. But he had no amateur fights. So he comes in right away and he immediately starts fighting, goes 2-3 in his first 5 fights at like 19. So he's losing early fights. He eventually improves, gets better, gets in Cage Warriors, gets that featherweight belt in Cage Warriors, which for those that don't know, the featherweight division in Cage Warriors is one of the best featherweight divisions outside of the UFC. And he ends up losing very close fights to Paul Hughes and Jordan Vucenic. But those are two guys that should be in the UFC. And he lost those in 5-round fights. He comes back. And he's made a lot of improvements. He's now 27. But the reason I like him is the skills. The skills of this guy I absolutely love because he's great at managing range. He sits in a perfect spot as far as range goes. Very, very quick hands, very, very good counter striking. So if you pressure Morgan Charrier, he's going to throw a 3-piece combo and he's going to throw harder and faster than you. He lands and you drop. Also, very defensively responsible in the pocket. It's like he throws a 1-2, and that 2 gets right back to the chin so he can throw the lead hook. It's like he just does things very, very orchestrated, very, very tight, very, very clean. Um, Early in his career, had some poor grappling, worked on the grappling a lot better now. Now he's offensive grappling a little bit more, vicious ground and pound. There's a fight where he almost got put in a reverse triangle. Then he breaks out of the reverse triangle, hits this dude with ground and pound for an absolute minute, and he's a boxer. Hits the dude with ground and pound for a minute, and the dude no more when he's on the stool. In the corner, he's like, "That's it. I had enough." So he got hit with some
Really?
ground and pound, quits in the corner. Very, very big leg kicks. Watched a fight where he got 2 leg kick knockdowns, kind of like the Ian Gary, Neil Magny situation. So this guy, in my opinion, just has a lot of the skills. He's only 27, super athletic. So I'm very excited to see his UFC debut. Only issue is he can be low output at times because he does try to be super technical. So it's like he'll sit there and wait for a counter shot when he should be pressing forward. That's kind of my major flaw. But he's a big star in France because I think he's probably one of the most popular MMA fighters in France outside of like Gan and a couple other guys. But he's got like a YouTube channel, like a 200,000 subscribers, very, very popular guy in France. So I'm expecting his debut to be impressive because I expect a big crowd. I expect the crowd to get real excited when they see this guy. And the UFC kind of gave him one of those matchups.
Okay.
They gave him a guy that comes forward, strikes, and leaves opportunity for counters. And Morgan Charrier has good counters and sometimes is a little bit hesitant. So I think this is a good matchup for his opponent, Manolo Vicini, I think, Italian,
Yes.
to pressure a little bit. And he's going to get a little reckless. Charrier lands a knockout in front of the French fans. All of a sudden, the UFC has a nice new prospect at 145 pounds. So I'm very excited. I wanted him to be on the UFC Paris card last year, but now we're sitting here a year later. He's on the card. So Charrier is a guy people should be watching. I'm sure not everybody is 100% aware of this guy, but very, very exciting fighter to keep an eye on. That was my concluding rant that I had to get out there because I am a Morgan Charrier fan and appreciate his skills. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see the debut.
I was checking. I think so. That's the first fight of the main card, and like you said, yeah, minus 400 favorite.
Yep.
I was curious when you were explaining. I was like, and I saw the dude he was fighting does it. It's his UFC debut too, so
Mhm.
it does kind of seem fighting someone on their UFC debut and minus 400. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
I think
It's
it sounds like also he's marketable too if he has a whole YouTube channel and stuff. So
yeah.
hopefully the UFC can as well
Yeah.
if he performs.
Great nickname as well. The Last Pirate. Great
The Last
nickname.
Pirate.
Yeah. And he in Cage Warriors he would walk out with like this mask, get the crowd pumped. We'll see if the UFC lets him walk out with his mask on.
Hmm.
Probably not, if we're being honest. That's not something
Yeah.
the UFC's too big in. But either way, I expect him to be an exciting start to the main card. I think he's going to kick it off in exciting fashion. Now, that was my closing rant on Morgan Charrier. So I hope a nice little PSA to everyone watching to make sure you're on when the main card starts because it starts off hot. Anthony, anything you want to throw out there before we shut it down for today?
Not really. New show or with the new format. First show with the new format. Enjoyed it, but I think I'll just say I this is the second time being in Paris, right? Since the one last year, because it was like outlawed there. Can't quite remember. Obviously, that main event was electric. Can't remember how exciting the fans were, the atmosphere. So I'm excited to watch them again and see if this is truly like a good spot where I like when the UFC always goes there.
Yep, I'm with you. Great weekend for sports as well with the college football. But someone will be back next Friday breaking down UFC, whether it's me and Anthony, whether Jerry's in here, whether Garrett's in here. We've got a handful of guys that do UFC here at Vendetta. So we will have two people breaking down some UFC next weekend, breaking down this card and previewing the pay-per-view, anything else that goes down. So make sure you tune in for that. And if you're a college football or NFL fan, tune in on Monday because Monday's show will be college football and NFL oriented. So make sure you check that out as well. But thank you to everyone who tuned in today to listen to us talk about some fights.